Welcome to the Holistic Psychiatry Podcast. I'm Courtney Brown Snyder, a physician and holistic adult and child psychiatrist. This past weekend, I gave a talk to a group of doctors about how early attachment experience can impact the treatment relationship, meaning the relationship between patients and their doctors. Doctors come to the treatment relationship with their own experience of relationship, and so do patients. Now, I'm not going to give that same talk here, but I would like to talk about how we regulate our nervous system in relation to others. And this largely comes out of our attachment experience, our first 3 years of life, that nobody is really thinking about because it's pre-verbal, and because any hint of exploring that time suggests that we're blaming parents. But there's a lot that can happen during that time, and a lot that can interrupt a smooth attachment period. So I'm going to talk about what attachment is about, what develops during that time, the three main aspects of our nervous system and how they are affected by that process, what the attachment styles are, and what happens when that doesn't go well enough. It doesn't need to go perfect, but when it doesn't go well enough, given someone's own unique genetic and epigenetic vulnerabilities, then what can happen? And then what we can all do to move in the direction of a healthier and more secure attachment, even when we're adults and no longer in those first 3 years. So let's get started. Attachment affects both our belief system about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others, and how we feel in this world. It's also about how safe we feel in our body, how regulated our nervous system is, how able we are to express our emotions. So why even consider this topic? One main reason is to help us understand ourselves and how we relate to others. And also, it can be helpful to understand the people around us and how they relate to us. We may have people in our lives who have high need for connection in order for them to feel more regulated. Sometimes that might feel overwhelming. It might feel too much. We may have other people in our life who we notice sort of withdraw when they're under stress and to avoid connection at times. Maybe they don't have as easy access to their emotional states. And then many of us struggle with a tendency to doing as a way to regulate our emotions. That when we feel under stress or under threat, our default style is to do for others, to try to fix things. And that can be a means of connection, but not a genuine being present type of connection, but a way to regulate our own nervous system by, in many ways, controlling those around us under the guise of being helpful. Ultimately, what we all want in order to feel regulated, to feel safe, to feel good about ourselves and about the world that we live in, is to have a secure type of attachment style. And that's where we can feel safe when we're alone, but also feel safe when we're with people. When we're under stress, we may know when we need to reach out for connection and reassurance, and also know when we need to employ self-care. And we've sort of integrated this part of ourself that is able to provide that care. We're able to regulate our emotions. We're able to express our emotions. We don't shut down, nor do we go into overwhelm. And let me start by saying, if you take kittens and you blindfold them for, I don't know the exact amount of time, let's say 3 months in their early development, When you take off the blindfolds, they will be blind. They will not have had the input with which to develop vision. Now, if you take an older cat and you blindfold them for 3 months and you take off the blindfold, they can still see. I mention that because early development is impacted by inputs. And so if we're not having adequate input in that first 3 years of life, then we can have impacts on first the differentiation between our right and left hemisphere, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We'll have impacts on our limbic system. That's the part of our brain that senses threat. And it's impacted early on by cortisol. So if in our early development we were chronically under stress, perhaps for whatever reason our needs weren't being met, and we had high cortisol levels, that would impact the development of the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, that lizard brain that you hear about. That is what senses threat. So if we have high cortisol levels early, we could be dealing with a wiring for danger, so to speak. So I mentioned right and left hemisphere differentiation, the limbic system, and the autonomic nervous system is also going to be affected during our early development. This is the part of our nervous system that functions automatically. When you hear about the vagus nerve, that is part of our autonomic nervous system. So our baseline autonomic nervous system is actually to be in a state of fight or flight. But we have our parasympathetic part of our nervous system, largely controlled through the vagus, that puts us into rest and digest. Well, if in our early life the vagus was not being accessed optimally, and I'll explain how others through caregiving were providing that for us, if that wasn't happening, then our set point for our autonomic nervous system can be in a different place. We can, again, be more likely to be in a stress response and not in that rest and digest state. So let's look at what happens in early life and how these systems can be affected. And I'm talking very generally. And keep in mind, too, that there's many factors. This isn't about good or bad parenting. There are many factors that can influence first 3 years of life. There could be war, there could be natural disasters, there could be famine, poverty, primary caregivers could be ill, the child could be ill and having to be in the hospital, there could be marital stress, the parents themselves may have had early attachment disruption or an attachment period that was not optimal for whatever reason this child's grandparents may have been dealing with. So this isn't about blame. That's another reason beyond people simply not remembering, is people don't want to go there. They don't want to imagine, or they don't want to blame their parents. And this isn't about blaming anyone. This is about understanding how our early experience, for whatever reason, could have shaped our neurophysiology. It is worth understanding because much of what was needing to happen then, we can provide for ourselves later in life. And I'll talk about that. Attachment security, which is what we're all aiming for, is when we are able to feel regulated, and meaning calm and at peace when we're alone and when we're with trusted others. It means we're able to trust people. Maybe not everyone. We shouldn't necessarily trust everyone, but that we can have trusting relationships. When we have a secure attachment style, we know how to seek proximity, seek connection when we are feeling under threat. And also, it allows us to feel safe and know how to provide self-care, basically be that other to ourselves. When we have a secure attachment style, we're able to express our emotions, tolerate our emotions, we have good self-esteem, and we have a positive belief about the world and about the future. Now, some people might argue, well, do we really want to have a positive belief about the world with all that's going on? And I would say, yes, we do. We can still recognize the challenges and the problems in the world without living in a constant state of fear or sadness or pending doom. So again, we all come into the world with varying degrees of inputs, whether they be genetic, epigenetic, the nutrients that we were exposed to, and other exposures before we were born, just life stress, or if you think energetically, just what we were being exposed to and our mother was being exposed to at that time. If we have a secure attachment, it could be a buffer to some genetic vulnerabilities that could otherwise lead to illness. If we don't have a secure attachment, then that threshold for developing illness can be lowered, and we can be much more likely to develop illness even without genetic loading. And that's because with an insecure attachment comes a chronic stress response that can feed into illness in multiple ways, even just through high cortisol, through inflammation, through oxidative stress. So again, to build the foundations of our nervous system, our right and left brain differentiation, our limbic system, the lizard brain, and our autonomic nervous system, and our HPA-Axis, which is the hormonal pathway involved in the stress response, those rely early on for others to do that for us, for others to regulate our nervous system. Not perfectly, not seamlessly, but doing it enough such that we start to integrate those neurologic pathways into our physiology, just like those kittens needed visual input in order to grow their visual system. Keep in mind, and most people don't appreciate this, every year of our life, especially in our early development, is more important than the next. Our first year of life is more important than the second year, is more important than the third year. They're all incredibly important. But if you're going to have a disruption, you would want to choose it later, if you had a choice, than earlier. 80% of our brain, as it is now, was developed in our first year of life, and 90% 5 years. So what happens with an infant? Or when we were infants, we'll put ourselves there. When we were under stress, because maybe we were cold or hungry, we would cry. Our cortisol would go up, and our caregiver would come, respond to our communication, and provide nurturing, warmth, food. And with that, our cortisol levels would come down, and our nervous system would settle down. That happening repeatedly would be over time, not all at once, but over time, helping our set points for our vagus nerve, calming down that fight or flight response. And it would help our limbic system not be overexposed to high cortisol levels. And so again, that repeated process of our feeling a threat, cortisol levels go up, we cry, our caregiver comes, calms things down. That repeated process is what regulates our nervous system then, but also builds in this ability to self-regulate over time. If that's not happening, then there's a persistent high stress response, high cortisol levels impacting the development of the amygdala, part of the limbic system that senses threat. So that can be like a wiring for danger. This is very adaptable. I mean, if you're in a environment in which there's not reliable responsiveness, then a state of vigilance could make good sense, could be protective. Also, the autonomic nervous system, we won't have as much vagal tone, so to speak. So instead of being able to access rest and digest, we may be more likely to be in a state of fight or flight, or even shutdown, which is another form of autonomic dysfunction, as we say. And regarding the right and left hemisphere, this differentiation is developed through holding. Now, many people don't realize that we instinctively, most of us will instinctively pick up an infant and hold them in our left arm. And what this does is it creates a means by which the right hemisphere of the infant is being engaged through looking at the caregiver's face. And in doing that, with right hemisphere differentiation and development, that's where we get empathy. It's where we learn social interaction. It's where we learn to tolerate differences. It's where we learn about embodiment, meaning we're not just the sum of a bunch of body parts, our body is a whole. So there are distinct traits and abilities that land primarily in the right hemisphere. And if that part of our brain is not being accessed through that early stimulation of the right hemisphere through holding, then we can be more left brain dominant. And many of us are going to be a little bit more left brain dominant anyway, just by virtue of our unique biochemistry. But too much left brain dominance is lack of empathy, very black and white thinking, not being able to tolerate differences, being very disembodied, not recognizing our body as a whole. I have previous episodes where I talk about left and right hemisphere differentiation. We're in a culture that's increasingly left brain, and it's really, if you look at the traits of the right and left hemisphere, we really want the right brain to be taking the lead and the left brain to be in the service of that. Ultimately, they're very integrated and they're never working in isolation. But we need to be growing the right brain for ourselves, for our infants, and for our culture, I would say. So I would just like to end with one of my favorite quotes, and this is by Jack Kornfield. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So if you're a compulsive caregiver or overfunctioning, know that you have to take care of yourself in order to even be able to take care of others. If you feel like you struggle to engage in relationships, you struggle with intimacy, you're uncomfortable with your feelings, know that there are many helpful tools through psychotherapy that can help grow that part of our nervous system. If you feel like you become dysregulated in relationships and your relationships are dramatic and overwhelming, know too that there's ways to learn how to contain some of those emotions and to learn to self-regulate. There's ways to develop trust. There's ways to, through psychotherapeutic relationships and trusting relationships with people that aren't dramatic, there are ways to heal and to grow that part of our neurophysiology and our belief system about ourselves and others. So I hope something here is helpful. I always welcome questions, and this topic is near and dear to my heart, and I would love to talk more about it. So if you have questions or comments, please send them my way, and that'll give me something to react to and respond to in a way that's hopefully helpful to you. If you want to receive these episodes in your mailbox each week, please consider subscribing at CourtneySnyderMD.com. There I have information about my consultation service, which I offer nationally and internationally, as well as my treatment practice. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.